Edmund Kemper was born on December 18, 1948 in Burbank, California, the middle child of Edmund Emil and Carnell Kemper. After his parents divorced in 1957, he moved in with his mother and two sisters to Montana. At 10, he buried one of them alive. The second, 13-year-old Kemper, swatted with a knife. Kemper had a difficult relationship with his alcoholic mother. She was very critical of him, and he blamed her for all of his problems. When he was 10 years old, she forced him to live in the basement away from his sisters, whom she feared he might harm in some way. When Ed Kemper was a child, he would keep his cat's dead bodies. He would dump the bodies in different areas. Kemper had a dark fantasy life, sometimes dreaming about killing his mother. He cut off the heads of his sister's dolls and even coerced the girls into playing a game he called Gas Chamber, in which he had them blindfold him and led him to a chair, where he pretended to writhe in agony until he died. His first victims were the family cats. At 10, he buried one of them, and the second, 13-year-old Kemper, slaughtered with a knife. He went to live with his father for the time, but ended up back with his mother, who decided to send the troubled teenager to live with his parental grandparents in North Fork, California. Kemper hated living on his grandparents' farm. Before going to North Fork, he had already begun learning about firearms, but his grandparents took away his rifle after he killed several birds and other small animals. On August 27, 1964, Kemper finally turned his building rage on his grandparents. The 15-year-old shot his grandmother in the kitchen after an argument, and when his grandfather returned home, Kemper went outside and shot him by the car, and then hid the body. Afterward, he called his mother, who told him to call the police and tell them what happened. Later, Kemper would say that he shot his grandmother to see what it felt like. He added that he had killed his grandfather so the man wouldn't have found out that his wife had been murdered for his crimes. Kemper was handed over to the California Youth Authority and underwent a variety of tests which determined that he had a very high IQ but also suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Kemper was eventually sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. In 1969, Kemper was released at the age of 21. Despite his prison doctor's recommendation that he not live with his mother because of her past abuse and his psychological issues involving her, he rejoined her in Santa Cruz, California, where she had moved after ending her third marriage to take a job with the University of California. While there, Kemper attended community college for the first time and worked a variety of jobs, eventually finding employment with the Department of Transportation in 1971. The same year he began working for the Highway Department. Kemper was hit by a car while out with his motorcycle. His arm was badly injured, and he received a $15,000 settlement in the civil suit he filed against the car's driver. Unable to work, Kemper turned his mind toward other pursuits. He noticed a large number of young women hitchhiking in the area. In the new car he bought with some of his settlement money, Kemper began storing the tools he thought he might need to fulfill his murderous desires, including a gun, a knife, and handcuffs. First, Kemper picked up female hitchhikers and let them go. However, whenever he offered a ride to Fresno State students, Mary Ann Page and Anita Luchessa, they would never make it to their destination. Their families reported them missing soon thereafter, but nothing would be known of their fates until August 15th. When female head was discovered in the woods near Santa Cruz and was later identified as Page's. Luchessa's remains, however, were never found. Kemper would later explain that he stabbed and strangled Page before stabbing Luchessa as well. After the murders, he brought the bodies back to his apartment and removed their heads and hands. Kemper also reportedly engaged in sexual activity with their corpses. Later that year, on September 14, 1972, Kemper picked up 15-year-old Aiko Ku, who had decided to hitchhike rather than wait for the bus to take her to dance class. She would meet the same fate as patient Luchessa. In January 1973, Kemper continued to act on his murderous impulses, picking up hitchhiker Cindy Schall, whom he shot and killed. While his mother was out, Kemper went to her home and hid Schall's body in his room, dismembered her corpse there, and the following day and threw parts into the ocean. Several parts of her were discovered when they washed up on shore. He buried her head in his mother's backyard. On February 5, 1973, Kemper used a campus parking sticker his mother had given to him to facilitate a double murder. He drove to the university, where he offered a ride to two students, Rosalind Thrope and Alice Wu. Shortly after picking them up, he shot the two young women and drove past the campus security at the gates of the two mortally wounded women in his car. After the murders, Kemper decapitated his two victims and further dismembered the bodies, removed the bullets from their heads, and disposed of their parts in different locations. In March, some of Thrope's and Wu's remains were discovered by hikers near Highway in San Mateo County. At the time of Kemper's murders, two other serial killers, John Wiley Frazier and Herbert Mullins, were also perpetrating their own crimes in the area, resulting in Santa Cruz receiving a ignominious nickname for the murder capital of the world in the press. For Kemper's part, he was dubbed the Co-Ed Killer and the Co-Ed Butcher. In April 1973, Kemper committed what would be his last murders. On Good Friday, he went to his mother's home, where the two had an unpleasant exchange. Kemper attacked his mother after she went to sleep, first striking her in the head with a hammer and then cutting her throat with a knife, as he had with his other victims. He then decapitated her and cut off her hands, but also removed her larynx and put it down in the garbage disposal. After hiding his mother's body parts, Kemper called his mother's friend, Sally Howlett, and invited her over to the house. Kemper strangled Howlett shortly after she had arrived and hid her body in the closet. Kemper fled the area the next day, driving east until he reached Pueblo, Colorado, where on April 23rd he made the call to Santa Cruz police to confess his crime. At first, they did not believe that the guy that they knew as Big Ed was the killer, but during the subsequent interrogations, he would lead them to all the evidence they needed to prove that he was in fact the co-ed killer. No one believed it was Ed Kemper when he confessed to the murders. Ed Kemper was very lonely the whole time and felt that that was one of his reasons for his killings and sexual desires. There were 10 victims, and the span of crimes were 1964 and 1973. I think Ed Kemper was disorganized because even though his victims were women, he still had sex with his victims after death and was suddenly violent with his victims. I also think Ed Kemper was missionary because he wants to kill a certain group of people, and he does it because of the hatred he has towards his mother. So he wants to kill just women, but finally after he killed his mother, he realizes that he doesn't need to kill anymore and that he needs to stop and turns himself in. Kemper faced 8 counts of first-degree murder. He attempted to end his own life twice while awaiting trial. While Kemper's attorney tried to enter a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, court-appointed psychiatrists found Kemper to be sane, despite a confession of cannibalism which Kemper later recanted. Kemper requested death by torture. However, California had a moratorium on death penalty during that time. He received 7 years to life for each count on the first-degree murder to be served concurrently. Instead of prison, Kemper was sent to California Medical Facility at the age of 69. Edmund Kemper is still resident of the California Medical Facility. He lives among general population and is said to be a model prisoner. He first came eligible for parole in 1979. He was denied parole in 1979, 1980, 1981, and 1982. After those denials, Kemper waited his right to parole hearing, stating his belief that no one will ever grant him parole. Perhaps Kemper is one of those people who actually thrive in the confines of prison. He waived his hearing in 2017. Kemper won't be able to become eligible for parole again until 2024.